In a formal sense, this is my last message as minister of St. Matthew's United Church in Calgary, what I had hoped to be my last in-person sermon before we left the sanctuary at the end of June. And for those of you who are watching who are not part of St. Matthew's, my time there comes to a close at the end of June this year, and I begin a new position at Trinity United Church in Nanaimo, British Columbia. Here on YouTube, however, you might not notice too much of a difference, except the title under my name might change. Since the pandemic struck, I've been using the Accessible Faith Project as a way to continue to deliver weekly worship resources to the people of St. Matthew's, but also to anyone who might find it helpful or meaningful. I'm also still creating more introductory academic resources, and as things stabilize, I hope that you will see some of those soon. And while I may not be at St. Matthew's after the end of June, I am grateful for everyone's support, and at least part of that legacy is in the work that is happening here. If you want to keep up on everything in both my new work on Vancouver Island and the ongoing growth of the Accessible Faith Project, please click on subscribe and that little bell icon so you can receive a notification every time there's a new video. I have said many times throughout my career that as a church that preaches resurrection, we are often afraid of dying. Much of our efforts are about reviving churches, about trying to bring them back to the glory days that once were. I've told stories about how churches have often sunk a great deal of money into finding some magic bullet that will restore things to the way that they were, to live up to a rosy memory of days past. But that's resuscitation. That's not resurrection. So how do we let go of that and actually live out resurrection? Sometimes it means letting go of some of the things that we hold on to most dearly in order to see what God is calling us to. In the early church, the act of baptism was a symbolic one of dying to their old way of life and rising with Christ in resurrection to a new way of life. On paper, that is still true today, but it's not really a lesson that is sunk in all that well. The truth is, we haven't always gotten that particular message, and sometimes it takes a significant event like this one to shake us out of it. A few weeks ago, I shared the story of the Ascension. Told in the first chapter of Acts, the risen Jesus takes his followers out to a hillside and then ascends into heaven. But just before he leaves, one of them asks him, "So is this the time that you're going to restore the kingdom to Israel?" The answer isn't a restoration, but about moving into something entirely new and discovering what resurrection truly means. Through the Ascension, Jesus leaves them to find out what that is. Through Pentecost, it all clicks together, and they understood that it wasn't about restoring the kingdom to Israel at all. Instead, it was dying to their old way of being and living into the commonwealth of God. It was living and making the resurrection real for people. In the weeks, months, and years that would follow, the disciples who would now become apostles would no longer huddle together, but would go out into the world and to change it. And they changed it by showing the world a new way of being, unafraid of death, and teaching people out on the margins that no matter how insignificant they felt, no matter how far removed from the halls of power they were, they mattered. Paul would go on to found communities of faith, groups of people in different centers across Asia Minor and Greece who could provide support to one another while carrying out the message of the commonwealth of God in their part of the world and making it a reality. Formed in a time long before dedicated church buildings and worship spaces were or even could be a thing. And not only that, their life had also an inevitable ebb and flow to it. Pandemic aside, one can visit the communities or the ruins of the communities where those early churches existed. But still, you will not find buildings for the churches in Corinth, Thessalonica, Ephesus, or Colossae. Those original communities don't exist anymore. In fact, none of the communities of faith that Paul founded exist today, but their work and their life do. Why? Because those early communities learned what it was to live their resurrection. It wasn't about preserving a building or a heritage. It was about going out and sharing with people the new world that was taking shape around them, to help them see the world as God does and live into the commonwealth of God. The points and times that they gathered were about preparing to be in the world, not to take refuge from it. We know that in those early centuries, they were in an environment that at best was apathetic and at worst hostile. And yet, they still did it because the message and hope of resurrection, that death does not have the final say, that the world could be a better place. And that message began to take root in communities throughout Asia Minor and Greece, and they grew and they ebbed as needed. It wasn't about who could get the most people together in one place or who could raise the most money. If anything, this experience of the pandemic has shown us that a lot of what we take for granted as being the church isn't what we thought it was. We have to find other means to be the church in this time. Especially for St. Matthew's, as our time together is coming to a close, we realize that the most significant impact that we have isn't about how many people we can gather in one place, but rather the lives that we touch beyond the walls that we build. We have come to associate the word church with a building, where the original concept was ecclesia. In its original form in Greek, this word meant to call out, or those who are called out. At a time when we are letting go of our building, we are investing those resources in the broader community, fostering new opportunities for life and hope around us. And God calls us out to be out there where God wants us to be, living our resurrection. Amen.